So, shall we begin? Okay. Yeah, so we are beginning our session, second full session. The format will be the same as the first, so each speaker will have 15 minutes to speak, and I will hold up this this fancy sign telling you that you have 2 minutes once you reach the 2-minute mark to finish your presentation, and the discussion will be at the end. And with that, let us hear the first presentation from our speaker, Dr. Liviu Marius Ilie from the University of Craiova, and he will be speaking about senators who were fit to rule the throne succession in 15th century Wallachia, from diplomatics to history. So, Dr. Ilie, you have the floor.
Thank you. The succession of the throne was an important and complicated subject in medieval Wallachia. Because of the absence of a political succession law, the prince appointed one or more possible heirs, and sometimes associated one of them to the throne. The Wallachian charters from the 15th century contains a recurrent formula that announces a probable political succession. During the life of my lordship and during the life of my son or my sons, placed either in sanctio or in dispositio of the charter. 1, 2, or even 3 sons are included in this short diplomatic text, and when the father wanted to associate one of them, the title of voivode was added at the end of the son's name. A similar text can be found in medieval Serbia. 2 charters issued by Milutin contain the diplomatic formula, as long as the sun shall shine upon the earth at St. George Monastery near Skopje, and as long as Hilander Monastery exists, Hilander Monastery Mount Athos. In my paper, I will try to depict 4 princes from the 15th century Wallachia: Mihail I, Vlad the Impaler, Radu the Handsome, and Radu the Great, who were appointed by their fathers as possible successors by the mentioned up formula, and who managed to rule Wallachia, even if other historical sources describe them as obvious sinners. How did the Wallachian princes from the 15th century perceive the scene in the context of throne succession? There are few traces in the written texts that can answer this question. However, by analyzing the charters issued from the princely chancery, some remarks can be made. In sanctity of their documents, the princes warned their successors about the divine curse that might strike them in case of not respecting the disposition of the charter. During the 15th century, a short text describes the possible succession to the throne as follows: After the death of my lordship, whoever God will elect to be the prince of the Wallachian country, either from the fruit of my heart, or from my relatives, or because of my sins, from another family. 3 possible categories of successor can be seen in the text mentioned above: the sons, the relatives, and the strangers. The word or, pli in Old Slavonic, underlies the absence of the succession law and opened the door to throne disputes. Similar diplomatic formulae are present in many Serbian documents. In a Bulgarian charter issued by the Tsar Ioan Shishman for the monastery St. John of Rila, in that charter, the following text is included in Sanctio: After the death of my tsardom, whoever the Lord God, the eternal Tsar, will place on the throne of my tsardom, be it the most beloved son of my tsardor, or some of the brothers and relatives of me. Mihail is the first Wallachian ruler that was appointed as possible heir by his father's charters and was also associated to the Wallachian throne. While his father Micha the Old was both Prince Gospodin and Great Voivode, Veliki Voivoda, Mihail was only Voivode. Many documents issued from Mircha's chancery contain the diplomatic formula during the life of my lordship and during the life of my son Mihail Voivode. Appointed by his father as his throne successor, Mihail became ruler of Wallachia after Mircha's death, January 31st, 1418. His reign was short, almost 2 years and a half. The circumstances of his death are linked to a military expedition that Mehmed I, the Ottoman Sultan, led in Wallachia at the end of the spring or during the summer of 1420. How was Mihail I of Wallachia perceived by his contemporaries? A possible answer comes from a Greek manuscript, Parousinus Graecus, 2953, dating from the 13th century, but having later notes written between 1419 and 1438 by Ioannis Eugenikos, a deacon and an homophylax from Thessaloniki. For the year 1420, the deacon mentioned strong earthquake that struck Thessaloniki in July. After that, he wrote, "The falling of great Wallachia under the Turks and the killing of Mircea the old children, Mihail, who was living as a lustful, and other children of his own." Eugenikos saw Mihail's death because of his sins, or because he was living as a lustful, as the Greek manuscript underlines. Vlad the Impaler is obviously the most famous of medieval Wallachian rulers, but his fame is late and mostly fictional. Vlad the Impaler is the historical character that gave birth to the bloody vampire Dracula from the 19th century Gothic literature and 20th century Hollywood movies. He was the son of Vlad the Devil, and together with his brothers Mircea and Radu, Vlad the Impaler was mentioned in the charter issued by his father Chancery. "During the life of my lordship and during the life of my sons Mircea, Vlad, and Radu" is the text that is often mentioned in the documents of Vlad the Devil. Radu's name is not present in all documents, probably because of his late birth. For many years, Vlad the Devil fought for the Wallachian throne against his brother Alexandru Alda. And thus he might have understood that it was not easy to conquer and keep the political power. That is why he mentioned 3 of his sons as possible heirs of his throne. 2 of them, future Vlad the Impaler and Radu the Handsome, were sent as hostages in the Ottoman Empire to secure their father's reign. Vlad the Impaler ruled 3 times in Wallachia. His economic and political disputes with the cities of Transylvania played an important role in creating his image of bloody ruler. The stories composed in the German cultural background of Transylvania were printed and circulated in various spaces. On the other hand, a Slavonic short chronicle, written a decade after his death, depicts his cruelty: killings, impalements, burnings, torture to death. Moreover, the author of the chronicle accused Vlad of Catholic conversion. He left our Orthodox faith and received the Latin decide. Therefore, Vlad the Impaler is described by his contemporaries as the perfect sinner. He is a monstrous killer and an apostate. Undoubtedly, this image was exaggerated as a result of his political enemies. His brother Radu the Handsome reigned immediately after Vlad from 1462 to 1473, and he was removed from the throne, but he came back 3 times. As well as his brother, he was fit for the throne, his father mentioning his name in Wallachian charters as possible heir. It is Laonikos Chalkokondyles who describes events from Radu the Handsome's life as a hostage in the Ottoman Empire. Laonikos depicts a gay relationship between the Sultan Mehmed II and Radu the Handsome. At the beginning, Radu rejected the violent relation. It happened that the Sultan was almost killed by the boy when he had wanted to have sex with him. Afterwards, he consented to it. Radu arrived at the port and became the Sultan's lover. In the summer of year 1462, Vlad the Impaler lost his throne and the Sultan Mehmed II supported Radu the Handsome to take it. The modern historiography, mainly Nicolae Iorga, believed that the Radu's cognomen might root in the relationship with the Sultan. Radu was still handsome, and with his beauty he charmed Mehmed. In his country he was named the Handsome, both with admiration and mockery. The last Wallachian prince I will refer is Radu the Great, who reigned from 1495 to 1508. He was the son of Vlad the Monk, and his father mentioned him as a heir and associated to the throne. Radu the Great remained on the throne after his father's death. During his reign, he had a dispute with Niphon, former Patriarch of Constantinople and Metropolitan of Wallachia. Niphon left Wallachia for Mount Athos, where he died, and during the reign of Wallachian Prince Nerve Basarab, he was canonized, and his life was written by Gavril the Protos of Mount Athos. The quarrel between Radu and Niphon, as it is described by the life of Saint Niphon, had canonical roots. Radu the Great married his sister with a nobleman who fled Moldova and who was already married. The hagiographical writing describes the forgiveness that Niphon granted to Radu. The saint's relics were placed over Radu's grave, and in a dream the Wallachian prince Nerve Basarab saw how Radu's body was washed by holy water sprung from the relics. This topos is obviously inserted in the text to describe that although Radu the Great was a sinner during his life, the saint forgave him after his death. Being a sinner in medieval Wallachia was not considered a prohibition for taking the throne. Mihail I, Vlad the Impaler, Radu the Handsome, and Radu the Great were princes who ruled the country despite the fact their contemporaries considered them obvious sinners. One might say that the power games played by the monarchs did not fit the word of God written by the Church. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. We will now move on to our second presenter, Professor Fatma Karagöz, who is an assistant professor at Galatasaray University, and she will be speaking on how to dethrone an Ottoman sultan, the evolution of legal discourse in fetva between 17th and 20th century.
Thank you for the introduction. Though my title, is everyone hearing correctly? Great. Though my title is about the change in legal discourse in Ottoman opinio juris fetva, most of my sources are secondary because we only have indirect accounts of deposition, dethronement fetvas in most of the cases. We have the accounts from chronicles. While most of the dethronements that I will talk today are based on a legal political consensus of the ruling elite, a fetva probably was not issued for each one of them. So after this brief confession, I would like to begin with, for those who are not familiar, by defining fetva, which is basically an answer, an opinion to a question, whether religious or legal. Of course, this opinion is based on Islamic law, Sharia. So here you see a copy of the fetva for the deposition of Sultan Abdulaziz in the 19th century. And of course, there's a political background for every deposition. I'm not going to talk about them, but I will try to give you some details whenever necessary. He became more conservative, more he became against the idea of constitution, which some of the ruling elites wanted to institute. So the name of the person involved in the fetva is referred as Zayd. It's a generic name. And it will, here, the Sultan was described as Emirul Müminin, ruler of the believers. Basically, they blame him by losing his conscience, neglecting his duties, spending the treasury in vain. Another reason to dethrone him was that because all of these problems, his ruling became harmful to land and its people. So for the second, the chronologically earlier example, the dethronement of Mustafa I, the chronicles here narrate the consensus of the ruling elite. As you see in the slide, it's a reference to Sharia, and it is certain that they thought on how to revoke him legally. The problem was also here a little bit of his mental capacities, which might, again, according to the narrative, result in lack of ruling the affairs and giving disturbance in public order. Caliphate here in this context is used similar to Emirul Müminin, meaning a legitimate ruler of the Muslims, both by moral and juridical sense, though these two senses are of course combined, could be intertwined. By looking at these two dethronements, you might think that the political legal thinking did not change much almost in 300 years. In any case, to be a caliph, to be a just ruler, required certain necessities like mental and physical health, to be a just ruler, to be able to conduct war, of course, at least in theory, that we learned from the treatises. I know I have jumped to my sources before giving you an outline and before giving you a proper introduction, but I might say before behind this presentation there is a narrative of decline and fall versus the narrative of transformation in the 17th century. And there is this book this is published in 2010 by Baki Tezcan. While Tezcan is not the first Ottoman historian to analyze and evaluate the 17th century as a period of transformation and change, he is the first historian to consider this period, which was once considered as turmoil, unbalance, lack of authority, as constitutionalism. I argue that there was indeed a search for political balance in the 17th century, but for a modern sense of constitutionalism, I think we have to wait a little bit. I also argue that though the style and the words of the fetvas remain same, there were some nuances and differences between the fetvas, which of course we can also understand through by knowing the political background. So what were things like before 17th century? Here we saw Mehmet II's portrait by Gentile Bellini, and the traditional succession system in the Ottoman Empire was instituted by Mehmet II, the conqueror, which considered the sovereignty as a common property of the dynasty, allowing any male heir of the sultan to have a claim on the throne. Though the firstborn could be privileged, he had to settle down his authority and in the capital. Thus, Mehmet II also allowed the fratricide in order to eliminate civil war. And this regime changed in the 17th century with the reign of Ahmet I, who was the first prince climbing the throne without having before having conceived a son. So his brother Mustafa, that I have talked about, was left alive. The fratricide system was annulled and with the times of Ahmet I, and it was accepted that the male member of the dynasty who was mentally the most mature and who was the oldest should have the throne. Now, after that, none of the princes were sent into province, but they were kept in a cage, which is not a cage, but which means quite a secluded and limited life. So from a blessed and earned reign to a formal, you can see it as a passage from a blessed and earned reign to a formal succession system. So in the 17th century, we have many sultans who were deposed because of in the result of a rebellion or a turmoil. Sometimes the troubles begin with the economic troubles of the Janissaries, Sultan's private military corpus. For example, in the case of Osman II, there was an attempt to reform the Janissaries, but this attempt Tezcan saw as against Ottoman constitution. Of course, the real reformist who was deposed was Selim III. And all of these rebellions had a typical course. They began to demand something economical, some rise in their revenues. Then they want to claim the removal from ruling elite. But at one point, they turned against the Sultan himself, and they want his removal as well. And with that higher demand, they also sought for the approval from ruling religious elite through a fetva. So, and even though they get what they wanted, the chaotic ambience in the capital did not cease easily. Now, getting back at my fetvas, and if I can remove this, yes. Here we have, this one is not given for the deposition, but the execution of the Ibrahim I. It is narrated that after the deposition, people felt pity for him because they heard his cries and wanted to restore him. So the ruling elite preferred to execute him as a necessary evil. But the legitimization here shown is as bribery. Like many other things, it harmed the proper order of the world, which is a main duty of the sultan. Sultan have to protect the proper order of the things. Here he is referred as sultan rather than caliph, and I might be overestimating here, maybe because he was no more a legitimate ruler, but I might be overestimating, overinterpreting. And for another Mustafa, things began with the discontentment against Feyzullah Efendi. Mustafa II, he liked very much hunting, back to our hunting things, and he left the capital for hunting because he liked it very much. And he was, again, actually, this is what Fetva narrates us. He began to neglect his duties. And as for the political background, he favored Feyzullah Efendi, his tutor and chief mufti, and this one managed to obtain a small fortune, even institute his own dynastic relations, etc. So just ruling was still, again, the main problem, and Sharia was the basic of legitimization for the Sultan. So, as for the deposition of Selim III, I'm not quite sure again about, I might be again overestimating, but he was a reformist. He was first of the, he was for a long time seen as first of the reformist sultans. And the person who narrates the deposition fetva is Asım Efendi. He's narrating the question, is his caliphate valid? And Ahmet Cevdet Pasha from Asım Efendi, he formulated the question similarly. However, Enver Ziya Karal, who is like the more official history writer of the Republic of Turkey at the beginning, he asked and formulated the question as, is the caliphate of such a padishah valid? Now, it might be just, it might mean nothing, but it might also mean that Karal had made a separation between caliphate and sultanate, which seemed to be different for when it comes to governing theory. So here again, Selim is accused with neglecting his duties. So yes. I have talked about Abdulaziz. After his removal, we have another deposition. The suicide thing of Abdulaziz is quite debatable, and Murat V was, he was already, he had some problems, I think mental problems, and he's thought to be an alcoholic. Here, the question is formulated through his state of mind, and he's referred as Imam of Muslims. So, the constitution, here the problem was also the demand to institute a proper and modern constitution by Mithat Pasha, and it was instituted in the times of Abdülhamit II, who is Murat V's successor. But it became suspended in 1 or 2 years. It became suspended during the war of 1877-1878, and it was reinstituted in 1908. But the deposition or removing of the sultan was not regulated in the constitution. So again, they had to take another fetwa. And in this one, I think what is new, I think this is why we came closer to a modern sense of constitution. Here there is an insistence on despotism through the word istibdat, which became to be used in this sense through the 19th century. And they insist on the nature of the punishments that Abdülhamit implemented. He imprisoned banished people without following Sharia, which also became to be used as a rule of law in 19th century. So I believe we are coming closer to the concept of just rebellion at the very beginning of the 20th century. So, in conclusion, I believe 17th century political movements had an aim to control sultans, and thus implementing a balance in politics. To qualify those as constitutionalism would depend of our understanding and of our definition of constitution, of course. The 17th century legal, religious, and military elite had definitely a notion of what just ruler was. As for the 19th century, though the legal language had many similarities to previous centuries, and therefore there is continuity rather than disrupt, political agenda was to implement a modern constitution. And at the beginning of 20th century, which is more related, and again I might be overestimating, with the concept of democracy, the oppression gaining a new name, which is despotism. And after the deposition of Abdülhamit II, the new sultan became a symbol rather than a political figure. However, we had, of course, another problem. The once reformist Party of Union and Progress becoming another oppressor, which could be ended only with the defeat of the empire in the First World War. But, of course, that is a different story. So I thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you for that talk. We will now be moving to an online presentation, so I will switch chairs to introduce our next presenter. Hello, Wallace Teska, can you hear us? Let me just see if he's in the list of participants. If he does not seem to be there.
Well, I suggest we move on, and if he logs on later, we'll include him in a later session.
Okay, yes.
I don't think he informed us that he won't be coming or something like that. Wallace Teska, did he say anything?
He said that he'll be having some technical issues, that he's not certain that he will be able to make it, so
okay.
We'll see.
Send him an email that if he manages to connect at any later point, we'll hear his presentation then, and now we're moving on.
Well, if somebody's having technical issues from Stanford University in Silicon Valley, then it's a pretty major issue.
He's currently
so we will move on to our next presenter, Professor Marek Stary, who is joining us from Charles University in Prague, and he will be presenting on Wallenstein's disposition of the succession in the Duchy of Frýdlant.
Yeah? Oh, I see. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers that they invited me, that I have a chance to speak in front of you. The second thing is 15 minutes is a very short time, so I will only present some basic facts and show some pictures, and the whole information, of course, will be in the written text. So we are going to move to Central Europe, to the period of 30 Years' War, and our main hero is Albrecht von Wallensten, who was originally the Bohemian nobleman, but as an imperial commander in 30 Years' War, he became one of very important figures in European history. The secret of his success was not so much his leading skills, but more his organizational talent. To say it simply, his victories were based on the fact that he was able to build a stronger army than his opponents. And there were written thousands and thousands of pages about his life and military career, but in fact, there is a very less attention which has been paid to this moment to his career as a ruler and economist.
Just click it again because you used the Zoom. Click on the presentation.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So he built a Duchy of Frýdlant inside the borders of a Bohemian kingdom, which is very unique in the Czech history. And later he also became ruler of traditional territories as were the dukedoms of Žegaň and Glogau in Silesia, which was also part of a Bohemian state in these times, and also the Duchy of Mecklenburg in the northern Germany. But over this duchy he lost control after the Swedish invasion in the early 1630s. Part of his care for his estates was also an effort to set the rules of succession, so these estates would be inherited within his close or the extended family without any problems. In the beginning, bit complication was for him that these territories was subjected to the different legal regime, so he had to make more mortis causa orders to some of them. This was evident in 1625, when he still owned only estates in Bohemia, because some of them were part of the new created Principality of Frýdlant, and they were fiefs, and the others were registered in the land tables and were free noble property. So he wrote a disposition about the fiefs on the 21st of June, and also he wrote testament about the others in the beginning of the July. Here are the later transcripts of this testament. Understandably, he tried to unite his states and build them into a compact body, and for this purpose, the legal institution of fideikommis, which had its origins in Roman law and which began to become more used in Bohemia in the 17th century, served him very well. The establishment of the fideikommis was granted by the emperor in 1622. In 1624, this status was extended to the entire Principality of Frýdlant. In 1628, the Duchy of Žaháň was also declared part of this entail, and finally, in 1633, the Duchy of Hloho was added. This is the emperor's decree from 1628, in which the Duchy of Žaháň was joined with the Duchy of Frýdlant to one fideikommis. An integral part of the right granted by the emperor to establish a fideikommis was also the right to determine its succession by unilateral legal act. This act, or better to say these acts, were called Dispositio, in English Disposition. The first of them, as I said, was written in 1625, but unfortunately it has not survived, and even its text is not known. The second, on the other hand, has survived in the original and is one of the most impressive, in my opinion, documents related to Wallenstein's rule in the Duchy of Frýdlant. It's a parchment book in blue velvet binding containing 30 sheets, mostly paginated, and the red wax seal of Albrecht himself and of 7 noble witnesses were hanged on the last sheet. The text was written in German, as this language was determined as the main official language of Wallenstein states, although he himself was Czech and he knew Czech very well. This is the first page with the titles of Albrecht, and here we can see some middle of the text with some articles, 20 to 22. After the Duchy of Lvov was incorporated into the Fideikommiss in 1633, the new version of Disposition started to be prepared by the Duke's lawyers and officers during this year. However, this new version was apparently not completed, and it preserved only in the form of drafts. This is one of them. This is because, as is known, Wallenstein was murdered in Cheb in February 1634 on the emperor's order. The original version of 1628 contained 46 articles, 2 of which were deleted in a later version. This surprisingly large scope of the disposition is based on the fact that it was not only the succession order, but it also regulated a number of issues concerning the government. For example, there were some prohibitions and restrictions preventing the future weakening of ducal power. So it was forbidden to alienate any estate, which was implied by the very nature of fideikommiss. It was also unacceptable to restrict certain jura ducalia, especially the right to brew beer, which was of a great economic importance. And although the document repeatedly announced the support of the Catholic religion, the Dukes of Frýdlant should not have been allowed to establish religious foundations if it would be to the disadvantage of the chamber properties and the ducal rights. As far as the succession issues themselves are concerned, the rules contained in the disposition can be divided into 2 groups. The first of these sets out the order of the individual families and lines that were to gradually take over the Duchy of Frýdlant as well as other lands. And the second deals with the specific eligibility conditions that were to be assessed in relation to individual persons. The first group of rules was concentrated in Articles 20 to 24. And the first, let's say, natural successors of Albrecht should be his male descendants. But from his 2 marriages, he had only one son who died after a few months in infancy. So in real, expected heir was his cousin and brother-in-law Maximilian of Wallensten. Next came Maximilian's younger brother Bertold, but because he died, he fell in 1632 in the bloody battle of Lützen. He was replaced in the next version by other unnamed Maximilian's younger brothers. The next ones would get a chance, other members of Wallenstein family, but only Catholics. In the end, there were descendants of Albrecht's father-in-law, Count Carlo of Charles of Harrach. This is the relationship between Albrecht and Maximilian. It's interesting that Albrecht had a lot of cousins which were closer to him, that were grandsons of George. So Maximilian was a really distant relative to Albrecht, but he was his brother-in-law. As far as eligibility for government was concerned, the first and foremost condition was Catholicism. In general, it was highlighted in Article 4, which was entitled Kein unkatholischer ist diese Disposition fähig, which means in English, no uncatholic can use this disposition. In Article 6, it was stipulated that anyone who fell away from the true faith, means Catholic faith, would lose his claims, and if the reigning duke did so, he would ipso facto lose his rule, and the Bohemian king should install another member of the family who is the next in the line of succession as a new duke. On the other hand, in the Article 36, entitled Exclusion der Geistlichen in dieser Succession, expressly were excluded persons of clerical status. Article 26 emphasized that there was no distinction between full and half siblings, and very interesting was the Article 41, in which all male members of the family were obliged to marry only with the consent of the reigning duke, whom they were generally to respect as their capo, patron und Obern. However, the disposition did not explicitly solve the problem. What would be the consequence of violating this rule? So what would be the fate of the children who would come out of such an unsanctioned or even morganatic marriages? In any case, illegitimate children were expressly excluded from the succession. Yeah, thank you. Even if they were later legitimized. Other self-evident condition for the real exercise of government was the maturity of the ruler, which was set in the disposition on 18 years, which is interesting because in Bohemia it was in this time 20 years. If the duchy were to be inherited by a minor, the next closest successor was to take over the role of administrator, which he was to perform with the support of selected noble vassals. Other question was the childcare, which should take over the mother of the minors with other relatives. And the last thing, Wallenstein in no way anticipated the succession of women, even when his only living child was a daughter. So the daughters of reigning dukes were to have no claims other than an endowment of 10,000 thalers. So in conclusion, the dispositions of Wallenstein are interesting and quite detailed legal documents the purpose of which was to define and precisely as possible the rules of succession to the ducal thrones in Frýdlant, Zahaň, and later also Hlohov. They dealt also with the eligibility for the government, which was conditioned by the male gender, age of 18, Catholic religion, and secular status. Since after Wallenstein's assassination in 1634, his estates were confiscated and distributed to new holders, this legislation remained a dead letter. But that doesn't make it, in my opinion, less interesting. Thank you for your attention.
So yes, thank you as well for that presentation. Should we check one more time in the chat to see whether Wallace is with us? And if not, I think we can move directly to the discussion.
No, unfortunately, he's not here. We can go to the discussion.
All right, very well. So we've had these three papers, and I'm sure there are lots of questions and comments. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Also, I think for the online members, maybe raise your hand in Zoom or type something in the chat if you want to ask a question, and we'll try and get to you as well. Questions? Yes?
Okay.
Yep.
First of all, I would like to thank today all presenters, and especially to Professor Fatma Karagöz. It was very interesting, but unfortunately, I was not able to read everything on the screen. Maybe it is in the booklet and after in the volume. I have some questions and considerations to the presentation of Mr. Ilie. First of all, again, to thank you for the interesting topic and presentation. There was, however, something missing, or at least I did not hear it. It concerns the formula of succession of the power in the Charter of Mircea the Old. That is identical with the charter of real charter of Tsar George VI. You mentioned the sons of my empire, the relatives, and so on, and the strangers. So, the strangers are not exactly the strangers whom God has chosen to put on the throne of my empire. For me, this is different because here, not whomever, but the God's choice to be in power. This could be very important, and I would like to propose some ideas. This is to suggest something. I did not think about the sinners. It is interesting, but let's say that everyone human being is a sinner, but Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, everyone ruler is a sinner, but in your case, they are, let's say, great sinners. Can we use the epistle of Saint Paul to the Romans that all the powers are from God and so on? And if God, it is God's choice, we are not able to know what is the wisdom of God in this choice. Only a question, suggestion, and so on. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Professor Beliarski. Yes, of course, we can use different biblical texts, but my question at this is whether they were known in Wallachian, not in Wallachian Church, of course they were known, but to the people who are near the princes. Talking about the sinners in the charters, I choose that text because it's the only that can be found in the charters. Of course, we have in the arenga of the charters different texts from the Bible, but I think the arenga is more like the person who writes the document than the prince itself. What I didn't underline is the fact that, because I didn't have enough time, is the fact that that text with the sinners appears only in the charters that are for the laymen, not for the monasteries. So that kind of stranger, let's say, somehow who is not from the family, can be from a noble family. For my sin, I can lose the throne from my family. Our colleague talked about the dynasty in the Ottoman Empire. I think this is the problem in Wallachian charters. Even if they are relatives, beginning with the 15th century, the sins can remove the throne from the family. This is how I read the text. I don't know if it's correct or not.
Okay, thank you. You will continue, and we shall see the result. Thank you.
I believe we had a question here, and then
If the question of the professor is on the same topic, then maybe he should go first. I would have a question for Professor Karagöz later.
Really on the same topic. It's not a question, it's a remark. We have the same situation in the sanctions of some Serb charters from the time of King Milutin, where the mention of sins are included as an excuse for changes in throne, including the foreign, specifically mentioned foreign people.
Thank you a lot. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question, as I've said, would be for Professor Karagöz. Given that the legal discourse of the Ottoman fetvas on the deposition of the sultans and the reasons used for these depositions, especially the first one of Abdulaziz, which is one of the chronologically later ones, as well as of Sultan Mustafa in 1623, could it be said, especially with the practice of the claim staying within the dynasty, however, every male member having a certain claim, did the fatwas actually legalize that kind of ascension to the throne of the most able? So the ones that would not squander the treasury, the ones that would fulfill all of the prerequisites that have been used. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Well, it would be doubtful, I think, if the results were as expected. Now, for example, I didn't talk about those details, but for example, when Mustafa was put on the throne, it was for the first time because he was put on the throne and he was deposed 2 times, and they probably knew for the first time that he was not, I mean, if he has a mental problem, he had it at the first place, and they knew it at the first time he had. And in some cases, I have to admit, I have a little bit lost in translation, because, for example, when they talk about Abdulaziz, the word is not, the word is actually, could be translated by as legerity of mind, something like that. So, this, I mean, the mental capacity thing is always not quite the same in each and every situation. And as for the possibility to obtain the narrative in the fetvas, well, I think it could be doubtful. I mean, I would doubt it highly, because also, and of course, I am carrying right now the prejudice of these chronicles, because they are written by the people who demand something from the, and they are related to the palace. They wrote in the zeitgeist of their own reign, so their own sultan. But yeah, all in all, short of it, it would be doubtful, I think, to think such. Thank you for the question again.
Thank you very much for the answer.
Further questions? Yes.
Thank you. For Mrs. Karagöz, perhaps I have not heard or I have not understood well who was competent, who were competent to realize the situation and to order the promulgation legally of the fetva. Okay, if it was a coup d'etat, it was a coup d'etat. But if it was not, who was competent to do all this work legally? And it is for 3 centuries.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, a very important detail that I couldn't manage. Well, for some cases, it was the Sheikh al-Islam, which is the chief mufti and head of the ulema, the religious elite himself. But in some cases, Sheikh al-Islam refused to give a fetva. For example, it was the case in Abdulaziz's case, actually. The Sheikh al-Islam didn't give the fetva, and they went to another important member of the religious elite. So, and like you said, of course, each and every one of them are actually coup d'etat. And in that case, actually, I mean, I used a lot of reference to him, but I think Tezcan's book is a little bit too much revisionist for me as well. So basically, they made the coup d'etat and they sought for legitimization, even though this legitimization followed some legal discourse. It had to, at least. Thank you again.
Professor Bilarski, another question?
I'm sorry, again. Is there some difference in the time of the coup d'etat, let's say, and the fetva? The same day, the next day, or a week? And was this the Sheikh al-Islam who authorized some lower mufti to make that?
Not the first for your first question. Actually, there is a process of negotiation. Things began, and I tried to mention about the process of. I mean, most of the processes are really the same. For example, in Osman's case, they demand the removal of one of his ruling elites. At first, he rejected, and they went to the palace. And at one point, Osman II accepted the removal, and then it was too late for him. So it was a process of negotiation, and sometimes, and in most of the depositions, Sultan did not accept, or he did not accept in time. As for the consensus process, sometimes, yeah, it depends. They look, at one point they look for. They want to see his approval. They want to seek for Sheikh al-Islam's approval. I mean, they are not. It's a process which could take weeks somehow. So it's not, and I will use this word. It's not institutionalized. I could say that. So I hope that answers your question.
Are there questions? Yes.
I have 2 questions. The first one is also for Fatma. What do the other sources about those events tell us? I presume, at least for the later ones, we have other accounts of the events. How much were the depositions and what was written in the fetvas in line with the public opinion of the time, let's say it? And if I may just pose my second question to Marek, Stary, you mentioned there was one of the norms said that the heir had to be from the Wallensten family and be a Catholic. Was that norm there just in case to guarantee the Catholic faith, but that was generally not a problem, or were there religious divides within the family itself, so it was actually something important in practice? Thank you.
Shall I proceed? Thank you for the question. Well, like you said, for the earlier events, we don't have much any other written sources. But funny thing is, in the case of Osman II, he's the people who lived in the same time, the chroniclers who lived in the similar time, criticized him as being, I mean, he was a good sultan in these narratives, in these first narratives, but he was not very, very much experienced, and he rushed into things, etc., etc. But in later chronicles, in the and by later I mean later in the 17th century and 18th century, he had a more positive image, and in the Republic, in today's, republics, let's see, founding storytelling, he had a very positive image because he's reforming the military, which is corrupt, etc., etc. Now, as for the others, let me think. Well, for example, of course, we have other sources considering the official controversing official history. For example, when it comes to the suicide of Abdulaziz, it's quite doubtful as an event. And for example, for Abdülhamit II, I mean, when there's this revolution of 1908. At first, he was not deposed, but there's also a part of counter-revolution which ended with Abdülhamit's deposition. So, in today's Turkey, he's a bit he's disputed as a figure, and yeah, you might say, of course, there were controversial narratives, but I have to say I have to maybe check this one more when it comes to 19th century and 20th century. Thank you.
We still have time for a few more questions.
In fact, the article about the members of Wallenstein family was not necessary because it was already in Article 4 that only Catholic can become a ruler. But the family was divided in a lot of branches, and some of them were Catholics and some of them were not. So probably, therefore, it was written once again according to the members of the family that only Catholics and none others.
Yes.
I also have the question to Professor Stary. Thank you very much for your report and for introducing us with this important document as Wallenstein's Disposition. And my question is that could we name the Duchy of Frýdlant the compound of the composite state as the Habsburg monarchy was at that time? In terms of vassal law, and so that the Austrian authorities just closed their eyes on his activity his attempts to establish his personal power and inheritance principle. So, do you think he had enough power, enough authority to establish this principle, or it was just an utopian, somewhat like that?
It's really a question hypothetical because we know he was murdered and all his estates were confiscated. But I think he had enough power in the 1620s and beginning 30s to really build dominion which can exist after his death. But it's really only hypothetical.
Maybe there wasn't enough political will among his successors. The sense.
Yeah, it was based on his personal power. It's true, but of course, if we stay loyal to emperor, maybe the duchy will exist for his successors. Yes. It's really difficult to say. It's only hypothesis. We can talk it after. Maybe I didn't understand very well the question, so I'll find it.
So yes, we still have time for questions if anybody else wants to ask a question. Yes?
To Professor Gül Karagöz, if I took it correctly, does the sense of your presentation is that in the earlier centuries, the sultans were criticized and deposed? The reason was their for being bad caliphs, and in the as far as we approach to the modern epoch, they have been criticized as bad rulers in general, with not so powerful religious reason and argumentation, or not?
Well, I wouldn't make this proper because, well, the problem is how do we describe and how do we understand caliphate as well? Here in this context is like head of the state. So basically, they might use the word imam or ruler of believers or caliph. It might meant the same thing. And I wouldn't also say that they became to be accused with becoming bad rulers rather than bad caliphs, but that might be something I have to elaborate. But for example, Abdülhamit himself, more than any other sultan, he used this title caliphate, not just as the head of the state, Ottoman Empire, but also as a religious leader, general religious leader. So he was the one who emphasized this title as such, as a little bit more related with its original meaning, maybe a little bit more. So I would be careful on separating those concepts, but I might elaborate, of course. Thank you.
I think there's still time for maybe one or two more questions, including in the chat.
There was one in the chat after the last session, but we were tight on time then, so maybe we could read it out. I think it was for Petr, it was something about Constantine, so I'll just go and read it out. So the question was, considering the controversy around whether Constantine the Great was baptized, how does it fit to the commemoration of him as a saint in the Orthodox calendar?
I actually read the debate about not about was Constantine baptized, but who baptized him. You know, so. I'm not really acquainted with theology, but I think for someone to become a saint, he had to perform some miracle. So if a person performs a miracle, I think from a logical perspective, there is no problems to be canonized. Indifferent of its or her religion, but in theological sense, I think that's not permissible. So I don't know answer to that question, but it is really interesting, and I think Constantine was really a great beneficiary of Christianity, so his canonization was rationale, and I think that he deserved it. I don't know if he performed some miracle. Maybe. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yes? Professor Budara, would you like to?
The question is very good. Of course, it is theological. But as we know, Constantine became a saint for two reasons. Because, first of all, he was the first person who made legal, legitimized the Christianity in the Roman Empire, and because he raised the cross with his mother, Helen, who found the cross in Jerusalem, and with her mother, his mother, they took the cross, they made the big church, and so on. I think that these are the two main reasons that Constantine became afterwards by the church a saint, especially for the cross.
Yes, Professor Bilarski.
First of all, not all the saints should make miracles. For example, martyrs, no need to make miracles. The main thing is that God accepted them saints, and we have to discover this because in the Orthodox Church there is no process of beatification and so on as in the Catholic Church. This is one. About Constantine, I have no doubt that he was Christian. If good Christian or not, this is another question. He was baptized because some of his deeds are not very, how to say, very Christian. You know very well. He was baptized, and the main question is if he was baptized by the Arian or by, let's say, Orthodox. The other important thing, I think, is that he was not somebody who imposed the Christianity as the official religion of the empire. He imposed the tolerance. This is the topic with Constantine. The following emperors, yes, okay, it is known, but he was about the tolerance. I could agree the story with the Holy Cross and so on. And finally, there is a tradition that sometimes it is far from his life and his contemporary appreciation. This, thank you.
So maybe I would abuse my privilege as moderator here to also add something to this Constantine debate really quickly. I think it's regarding his veneration as a saint, it's important to differentiate between our modern scholarly understanding of whether Constantine was a Christian or not and the Byzantine understanding, or say the understanding of Constantine in the Orthodox world. Because I would maintain, without knowing any too much about it, that almost all Byzantines and all Byzantine writers understood Constantine as a Christian. And I don't think that there was, as far as I know, in the Middle Ages, serious doubt that he had been baptized and was a Christian. But that's, of course, isn't the same as our modern scholarly understanding of whether he was a Christian or not. And the second thing, just for the non-specialists, it is perhaps important to note that the question of baptism, most baptism in this period in late antiquity was undertaken by adults. So there wasn't infant baptism like we know in most of the Christian traditions today. And a lot of Christians actually wanted to be baptized shortly before they died so that they would have as little sin as possible after they had been baptized. And there we have all sorts of texts, basically, especially from, say, the Cappadocian Fathers, convincing adult Christians to be baptized. And I don't know if that's widely known, so I just want to throw that into the room. Right. I think we have lunch planned for for 2 o'clock. And we didn't have, we were missing one presentation, so we still have extra time, but I don't know if we should just break earlier, or Nina, you can.
There aren't any more questions.
I mean,
Last chance for questions. Anyone online, offline?
We can
No,
talk
in
about-
that case, early lunch. If lunch isn't there, it will be there in 10 minutes. Online participants, sorry we can't invite you to lunch. We continue at 3 with our second keynote lecture by Professor Athena Dimopoulou. And in the meantime, enjoy your lunch.